We often find inspiration in things we admire. Sometimes we emulate their paths or actions. But what happens if the person idolizes something truly horrific, like Nazi warfare? This brings us to a name that chills the bone. General Shiro Ishii, the combat medic officer of Japan during World War II. Today, we will discuss one of the darkest chapters of World War II. We will uncover the terrifying actions of Unit 731, a secret research team that carried out atrocities beyond imagination. Please be advised that this episode might be unsettling and reveal the monstrous acts of our past. Join me as we peel back the layers of history often left in the shadows, revealing truths as horrifying as they are critical to remember. Before we dive deep into the harrowing details, let's take a step back and paint a broader picture of Japan's position on the world stage from the late 1800s to the early 20th century. From 1894 to 1905, Japan triumphed in two major conflicts. The First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1896, and the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905. These victories didn't just expand their territory, they heralded Japan as a formidable force on the world stage. But with this rise in power came a dark turn. By the early 1930s, Japan had shifted towards a military dictatorship submerged in fascism. It was a nightmare not only for its people, but also for its neighbors. This period marked the rise of a dangerous belief in ethnic superiority and unwavering loyalty to a supreme leader. With such ideologies, Japan's ambitions grew bolder, leading to the invasion of China and the capture of Manchuria and other coastal regions. In these conquered lands, particularly Manchuria, Japan began something sinister, a biological weapons program. The year was 1931, and with the occupation of Manchuria, Japan saw an opportunity. They established Unit 731, a facility far removed from the public eye and well-positioned to carry out some of the most chilling experiments in human history. The local population, viewed as expendable assets, became unwilling subjects in gruesome tests. The horror of these acts, committed under the disguise of scientific progress, was unimaginable. And the chilling fact? The victims weren't just Chinese. They came from various nationalities, like wartime prisoners, Russians, Koreans, Mongolians, and some Westerners as well. And guess who was the showrunner of this unit? It's General Shiro Ishii. Unit 731 began in 1935, under the guise of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army, led by General Shiro Ishii. This wasn't just any research facility, it was the dark heart of some of the most gruesome experiments during World War II. Imagine a place where the horrors of science fiction come to life, but far worse because it was real. The Chinese landscape became a chilling backdrop for these experiments, where chemical and biological weapons were not just developed, but tested on humans. The victims? Ordinary people. Men, women, children, and even infants, all caught in a nightmare they didn't sign up for. Many were kidnapped, and others were born into this horror, the result of systemic abuses by the unit's personnel. It's a chilling echo of the atrocities the Nazis committed. At its core, Unit 731 was supposed to study the effects of disease and injuries on soldiers' fighting abilities. But under Ishii's command, they pushed past any known moral limits. They didn't just observe, they orchestrated. They didn't just test, they tortured with biological and chemical horrors. This was where humanity's darkest impulses were given free rein, all hidden behind the official-sounding name of research. The true horror begins to show as we peel back the layers of these secrets. This isn't just a story of wartime atrocities. It's a stark reminder of how easily those in power can twist science. In the early days at Unit 731, the captives were treated well, but not out of kindness. They were fed and cared for, but only to prepare them for the horrors that awaited. These prisoners weren't called by name. Instead, they were referred to as maruta, or logs, dehumanizing the victims right from the start. The real terror began with the experiments. Men, women, and even children were subjected to unspeakable acts in the name of scientific research. Diseases like plague, anthrax, and cholera were their unseen enemies, injected into their bodies, or introduced through wounds. But the cruelty didn't stop at disease. Vivisections were performed without mercy and without anesthesia. Imagine being cut open, alive, and aware as they studied the ravages of infections within you. Thousands of people, including men, women, children, and even babies, were held captive in prisoner of war camps, where they faced horrifying experiments, and this usually led to death. Even pregnant women were not spared. The prisoners were deliberately infected with various diseases so that the effects could be studied by removing their organs. Was this really for science, or just a cruel display by psychopaths pretending to do research? Prisoners had their arms or legs cut off just to see how much blood they would lose. Sometimes the doctors would reattach these limbs to the opposite sides of their bodies just to see what would happen. Others had their stomachs taken out and their throat connected directly to their intestines. And in some cases, doctors would remove parts of vital organs like the brain, lungs, and liver. Can you imagine the level of cruelty involved in doing something like that? Yoshimura Hisato, a physiologist with Unit 731, had a grim fascination with hypothermia. He would dip prisoners' limbs into ice-cold water, freezing them until they were solid and coated with ice. When tapped, these limbs would clink like wood. Then, Hisato would experiment with various cruel methods to rewarm them, like pouring hot water over them, holding them near a fire, or just leaving them to thaw overnight. The horrors didn't stop there. Some victims were put into pressure chambers until their eyes burst out. Others were used as human targets in grenade and flamethrower tests. Some were tied down to test biological bombs and exposed to deadly pathogens. The so-called research included infecting areas with plague, causing epidemics that killed tens of thousands. They even went as far as dropping infected snacks in Nanjing, watching epidemics unfold with a twisted sense of achievement. And let's not forget their bioweapon field trials, where they attacked multiple Chinese cities, leading to countless deaths. All this, and Ishii probably thought he was just being a thorough scientist. It's terrifying what some will do under the guise of medical research. Unit 731 didn't just dabble in science, they turned cruelty into art. They unleashed pathogens like the plague and typhus into neighborhoods, injected diseases like tuberculosis and syphilis directly into prisoners, and conducted brutal experiments like blasting people with X-rays and chemical warfare agents. These monstrous activities triggered epidemics of bubonic plague, killing tens of thousands. In one particularly grim operation in Nanjing, they sprinkled typhoid and paratyphoid germs into the city's wells, marshes, and even the snacks handed out to locals. Their experiments didn't stop at disease. They conducted at least 12 large-scale bioweapon field trials and hit over 11 Chinese cities with biological warfare. One attack on Chengda in 1941 led to about 10,000 people suffering biologically induced injuries and 1,700 deaths, mostly among the Japanese troops themselves, thanks to cholera. But why stop at germs? Ishii, ever the innovator, also designed bombs, some made of porcelain, to spread these deadly diseases efficiently. These bombs rained down on agricultural sites, reservoirs, and more, unleashing anthrax, plague fleas, and other joyful surprises. The researchers, snug in their protective suits, would then watch and take notes as the chaos unfolded. And the creativity didn't end there. They tested grenades, flamethrowers, and pathogen bombs on humans tied to stakes. They observed how long it took people to die without food and water. They injected prisoners with horse blood, exposed them to fatal doses of X-rays, and subjected them to gas chamber trials with various chemical weapons. And if that wasn't enough, they also experimented with exotic poisons like pufferfish, toxin, and ricin. All in the name of science, right? Well, this was science without a shred of humanity. Just a cold, calculating series of experiments that ended the lives of an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 people. It's a stark reminder of how deep the well of human cruelty can go when ethics are thrown out the window. As World War II wrapped up in 1945, instead of facing the music for their horrendous war crimes, Ishii and his crew got a pretty sweet deal. The US authorities nabbed them, but they handed them a get-out-of-jail-free card rather than throwing the book at them. Why? Because the data they'd collected on biological warfare was seen as too valuable to pass up, thinking it might come in handy for future conflicts. Ishii then lived out his days in peace, passing away in 1959 without ever facing justice. Meanwhile, some of Ishii's team, caught by the Soviets, saw inside a prison, but even that didn't stick. They were returned to Japan as part of a diplomatic charm offensive to warm up Soviet-Japanese relations. And here's the kicker. Members of Unit 731 even hold reunions in Japan after the war, as if they were just old-school friends catching up, not war criminals reminiscing about their horrific past. This whole saga shows just how bizarre and chillingly negligible accountability can be. The story of Unit 731 isn't just a footnote in history. It's a stark warning of the dark places unchecked power and unethical science can lead us. It highlights why we need solid ethical standards in research and a commitment to remembering and learning from the past, ensuring atrocities like those committed by Unit 731 are never repeated. Let's keep the spotlight on these stories, not for sensationalism, but to honor the victims and safeguard human dignity. To watch more such real-life thrillers, subscribe to Plotline.